to order. Is that supposed to be 3? Okay. Do we have AJ and Cindy on the line with us?
I am here.
Okay, AJ's here. All right. AJ, would you like to go ahead and get us started, please?
Absolutely.
Thank you.
And I very much apologize for the mix-up in times. So the first thing that is on our agendas is check in with folks relative to the work, the pre-work that folks were doing in advance. And so I want to take a moment and give each of the 7 of you an opportunity to just say a quick word about, is it possible to lower the screen share? Excellent. There we go. Good to see you all. So before we dive into the work of the day, I just want to go around and give each of the 7 of you an opportunity to share out a little bit about what did you get as a result of having completed the pre-work for this session. Who will be the first to share? All 7 of you get a chance to share about the homework you completed. Who will be the first to share? Yeah, Rodney, go for it.
You're referring to the agenda review homework?
Yeah, time use tracking.
Yeah, time use tracking.
So what's not so much the activity itself, but just what's one thing that you took away from having complete? So you did complete the practice?
Absolutely.
Absolutely. What's one thing you took away from it?
That student outcomes was not a overwhelming focus of that particular meeting. Yeah,
student outcomes wasn't a focus of that particular meeting. Got it. Thank you. Who'll be the next to share? Which Tanya? Which you completed the practice?
I did. Definitely.
What's one thing you took away?
Well, similar to Mr. Jordan, I too left noticing how little time at that particular meeting, was not outcomes focused. And the other piece was also around, our community engagement piece, how little time was also spent on that, and notice that as an area for improvement.
Gotcha.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Thank you. Who will be the next? Yeah, Lauren. You completed it.
Yes, I completed that one, and I actually took notes at the one last week, so it's ready for completion.
Excellent.
I think that's easier for me to do notes. I write. In fact, I sent the sample to Cindy, so that she could see how I was doing it. The thing I noticed, the same thing we're hearing everyone saying, is I wasn't getting much time on student outcomes, but I wasn't really clear on what the definition was that I should be looking for. I thought maybe I wasn't understanding the definition enough. And so I'm hoping maybe we can get a little bit into that so I have a better understanding, because it just doesn't seem like I should always be zeroing down it. And as far as the community work, I think I'm on 7 signups there. I'm hostess on 6. I've contacted 4 of those 6 to start setting up the times to meet with them. And of the other 2, they're 2 civic leagues. And the civic leagues are mostly not operating. And so I'm having difficulty getting contacting the ones that are offline for the moment, but I'm working on the Civic League situation.
Excellent. Thank you so much. I appreciate your diligence. Who will be the next to share? Everybody gets a chance. Yeah, Christine, you got a chance. You finished the homework?
Yes, I completed the assignment.
Excellent. What's something you took away from having done so?
Pretty much the same as everyone else. The disproportionate time used for non-student output activities versus student output activities.
Why do you think that is, Christine?
Good question. I think we haven't been programmed or used to operating in that fashion from the beginning of this group of elected body. So it's more so out of habit and lack of knowledge of focusing our agenda in that fashion.
Got it. All right, thank you. 4 down, 3 to go. Who will be the next to share? Yeah, Noelle, you completed the homework?
Yes, I did. I had to get my
What's something you took away from it?
very similar to what everyone else is saying. I had a lot of zeros noted when I went through the exercise, and I really had to look at the agenda and the minutes and then kind of go back through the video to kind of see how everything fit on the evaluation tool that we have. There was a lot of discussion, as Ms. Smith said, on non-student outcomes, and probably I feel also a lot of emphasis on operational matters versus board level matters, which, to your earlier question, why do I think that is? I think that if we plan and are intentional about our discussions and know where it is that we want to end up, it will focus our conversations better.
Yeah, got it. Excellent, thank you very much. Who will be the next to share? 5 down, 2 to go. Yeah, Carlos, you completed the homework assignment?
Yeah, I just didn't turn it in, you guys, but I did. Went through it. Everything is pretty much been said.
Would you mind emailing it over to Cindy right now?
Yep, I can do that.
Thank you. What did you take away from it?
Well, I mean, agendas are what you make up of it. I mean, and I think everything has really been stated already. If we want, you have to be intentional about what you value is the most important thing to cover. And also what, there are different types of meetings. And when we have a business meeting, it should be about taking care of business and not necessarily doing the work in that particular meeting other than action. And then if we're having workshops or whatever else down there, it should be more informational to the level of the board so that we can have the necessary information to carry out the actions and the actual meetings that we need to. So if we're going to be student focused, and that's what we're saying we're going to do, that we do have room for that, room for improvement regarding that and placing those items there, making sure that the reports and the information that we're receiving is focused on that. And I think Dr. Gabriel also mentioned it, less on operational, because that's what we hire a superintendent and the administration to do, and really getting that necessary information that we need just to the board level, not going below the waterline, as they would say. So yeah, there's definitely room for improvement.
Yeah. And who did we meet? Noelle, yeah. Did you get a chance to complete the homework?
You did, Noel. I think we're waiting on Dr. Martin.
Oh, I'm sorry. Adele is who we missed. Sorry about that. Yeah, Adele.
She's working on a technical.
Okay. I agree with my colleagues. I think I had the same response, a lot of zeros. We were focusing on operations more than student outcome. And even as far as, we've also spent very little time on monitoring our goals, which some of it, yeah, just the agenda, the items on the agenda just didn't lend themselves to any of that discussion.
Yeah. So just want to start is a way of getting started, an opportunity for people to just kind of reflect out a little bit about the pre-work. However, I do want to clarify one expectation on a go-forward basis. When you share the pre-work back with us, that allows us to do some analysis and figure out where are there gaps in people's understanding and things that we need to lean into or things that we need to lean away from. If there's things that you've already kind of mastered as a team, then we don't want to spend time on that. If there are areas where people are struggling, we definitely want to lean into that. What you should expect from us as a go-forward basis is that when there is pre-work, that we'll do our best to make sure that you have at least 7 days to do the pre-work. Our request is you complete it, and if it requires something sent back, to do that prior to the board meeting. That way we have a chance to review that and tailor the work so that our time is used more efficiently. On a go-forward basis, anytime that's not complete, then sending us responses, then we'll probably just postpone that session, give you all the additional time you need, and then pick it up at the subsequent session. Cindy, I had jumped in here, but this is really your meeting. I didn't know if there's something else in terms of kind of people reflecting out about the homework that you wanted to cover.
No, I think what I heard, and I will start by apologizing for being late. I had this down at 3 Central versus 3 Eastern, so my apologies to all of you. Yeah, so I do think from what I heard from the reflections that that there is some basic understanding around how the board is spending its time. And I did hear, I believe, Mr. Clanton talk about that the way the board spent its time was actually a reflection of how the agenda was built. Did I hear that correctly?
Yeah, you did.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So I think, and I think what I have garnered from what has been sent to me and from what I'm hearing today is probably what we can mark as a baseline score for this meeting, at least, is that the percent of time spent focused on student outcomes would have been 0. Does everybody concur? Do I have any disagreement with that? Mr. Jordan?
Yeah, so I didn't give it a complete 0. I guess picking up from the point that Mr. Clanton was making. So, and also some of the comments that were made earlier. So that particular meeting, we were looking at the board taking action on return to school plans. And so a lot of the focus was on the return to school plan piece of it, because in and of itself, a lot of that was operational in terms of what was presented, what we were discussing, and frankly, what was required of us at the time. But I found that embedded within that, at least on my scorecard, I noted that that there was some conversation within that return to school plan around some student outcome pieces. And then I also thought that our student rep in her comments, that she gave some student outcome focus. So I did have some minutes that I thought was student outcome focus. I didn't give it a total 0.
Yep, I do recall that you had noted those in your evaluation. Does anybody have anything to say, or any thoughts on what Mr. Jordan mentioned? Ms. Campson?
Actually, I really agree with what he said, because this is what I thought too when we were looking at the February agenda and watching that video, was that meeting was centered around returning to in-person instruction, and therefore had a lot more to do it with an operational side than with an instructional side. And so I think that could have swayed the answers, except that I also was taking notes during last week's meeting and got pretty much the same outcome as I got with this one. And also, once again, I'm still not sure exactly what qualifies as a student outcome. I just like to get that more clear. I mean, it
Sure.
seems like it would be obvious to me, but I find myself going, well, should I count that or should I count this? For example, in one situation, Ms. Basine was trying to find out if we had some updated SOL data or something. Well, to me, that seemed like, and it was just a real quick thing. I think I put it down at 1 or 2 minutes, but that seemed like student outcome oriented. But was it for sure? Because, what was the, she wanted some information about SOL data. I can't recall exactly what. To me, that seemed like that would be focused on student outcomes, because those are assessments you do to see how they're doing, but it wasn't positive. And so I'm hoping that today, I know we ran out of time last week, but that today maybe we're going to go through one of these forms and really look at what the topic was. So if I could be clearer. And then the other thing I was thinking is there were a number of things on the evaluation form that wouldn't come up every single meeting, like the superintendent's eval, that's a whole section, or our self-evaluation, that's another whole section. There are a couple of others that I had marked. I can't find it right. Oh, here they are. The superintendent's evaluation, the the reviewing of guardrails and where we aren't even there yet. And another section was on governance of things about the training and all. So those would, except for the exact times when they came up, we would always be zeroing those. It seems like it might make us look worse than we are, because the percentage would be low, because we'd be putting zeros next to self-eval, for example.
Sure. So, and we can go through the form.
That would be a huge help for me.
I would be happy to do that with you all. And just to make sure that
if it's just needed, if it's only needed by me, I don't mind, calling you and do it. I don't want to take everyone's time if no one else has that problem. But I personally feel like I like to be sure exactly what the definition of the particular piece I'm looking at is, and that would be helpful to me. So either way is fine.
Okay. Board, does anybody, do we have others who would like to go through the form together, line by line, or I see Adele, Noelle, anybody else interested in doing that? Rodney? Okay. Why don't we just go through it and just to make sure that we are all clear, because I do think that there's a couple of things that have come up that would probably be helpful, and we can kind of run through it somewhat quickly, and then if Ms. Campson or anybody else for that matter still has questions, I'm happy to get together at another time to run through in more detail if that's needed. And that's an offer, a standing offer anytime that there's a question on anything, when you have homework or otherwise have a question about something happening or want to check in, I'm happy to do that.
Cindy, I have a question.
Sure.
First one is just a minor detail. Is there a way that you can just PDF us a copy of the actual evaluation? Because in the board book, it runs in between 3 different pages. Okay. And then number 2, would this type of an evaluation form, as Mr. Clanton said, would this be more appropriate for like a work session versus a business meeting? Or when we go through the form, you'll differentiate between, you might see more of this at a work session versus more of this at a business meeting?
Yeah, so this is actually a monthly time use evaluation. So what a board would be using it for would be to evaluate the time used for an entire month in any meeting that is authorized by the board. So that would be a committee meeting. That would be your regular business meetings. That would be your work sessions. Anything that, like I said, is authorized by the board, and it would exclude those meetings, like this would be excluded because it is a governance training, and executive closed sessions would be excluded, and those types of meetings, which is at the very bottom, you'll see under other closed sessions. So non-public meetings consistent with open meetings law, that time is not calculated. And then any time spent on activities that is not one of the above is the other. Actually, I'm sorry, in continuous improvement, board training does count. I misspoke there. Does count as time as student out on this form, and that's under continuous improvement.
Well, then, Cindy, since the superintendent's discussion is all in closed session in this district, maybe it's not in other districts, and I don't think it may be in some districts, then would that not be on our list, because we're supposed to, it has a section in here, the evaluation of the superintendent. If we're not discussing that publicly.
Yeah, so the portions of that are discussed in a closed session, you just would have a zero there if that's not discussed in a board authorized open public meeting.
But then that would lower the percentage.
You wouldn't be counting those minutes as in the total.
Okay.
Yep.
So when we get our total number at the bottom of the evaluation form, we would then subtract out the time that well, that still would work because it's a closed session. It's a closed executive session.
So the only minutes counted are the minutes counted in open session. Those are the only minutes counted toward the total, and the only minutes that you would be dividing into the form.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And then as far as providing a PDF, there is a Google Docs form, a Google Excel or Google spreadsheet that was made available, and so we can make sure that that's accessible to everyone. But that link was shared, and I'm happy to share that again.
Yeah, use the Google sheet. It makes your life a lot simpler.
Yep, it'll do the calculations. And
so do the Google sheet versus the one that's embedded in the book. Okay.
Oh
okay.
Yeah, that's a huge help. And
okay.
And that was when you were sending all those links earlier, because I must not have done it. I probably didn't go into that. That's my fault.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Because I must have stepped on the first one and found that evaluation form and moved on, which was a little careless. So.
Yeah. And yeah. So let's start by going through. Let's just start at the top of the form. And basically, this form is organized from top to bottom, from generally higher leverage activities down to those that don't necessarily correlate as much with improvement of student outcomes. So, and what you'll notice is in that first column, it's called framework. So vision, goals, values, guardrails, monitoring and accountability, communication and collaboration, and continuous improvement. Those all correspond to the student outcomes focused governance manual. So that's a little bit about how this form is organized. Then, of course, the second column, each activity is listed. And then if you jump over to the fifth column, the description is there as far as what that activity is. So the thing that I will mention and probably repeat more often, because I think it's worth repeating, is that if it doesn't fit the description, then it doesn't count in that category. The other thing that I'll say, and because I've heard, like some concern about having zeros in certain sections, this is an evaluation. It's a reflection process. It's not about good or bad or right or wrong, but it's an opportunity for the board to really look and see how it is that they've spent their time, and allow the opportunity to understand if what they're doing is matching what they say they want to do, what their priorities that they've set are. So it lends itself to an opportunity for process improvement, for the board, to that continuous improvement to become more intensely student outcomes focused. So the first thing is goal setting. And so that's reviewing, discussing, and or selecting goals. And did anyone have anything other than a 0 in that section? No. And then I think where there might be some difference in what was filled in here among board members is on that goal monitoring. So reviewing, discussing, and or accepting or not accepting goal monitoring reports in accordance with the monitoring calendar. So did any activity during that meeting correspond with that descriptor? Adele, you had a question?
Well, I spent a lot of time trying to interpret that but then I guess I decided on, we had spent several meetings talking about and getting presentations on the potential transitioning of our children back into the classroom. Mm-hmm. And so at each of those meetings, we would critique it and we'd say, well, can you do this? Can you do that? And then Dr. Birdsong would come back with a revised plan. So in that sense, I thought, well, we had given her, kind of what our vision and goals were in this project and the guardrails. So I thought of it that way, that yes, we were actually monitoring what we had said at previous meetings. So that's how I ended up interpreting it. So okay. I did have a number next to mine.
You did? I'm sorry, what was that?
I did give a time number next to it.
Okay. Anyone else? And I heard, yeah, Rodney?
Yeah, I also had, as I mentioned earlier, so I counted 10 minutes during our calendar discussion when we were talking about what our school calendar was going to be moving forward. 5 minutes during committee reports, and then the report by the student board rep Simpson. So I had 20 minutes under goal monitoring for that meeting.
Lauren.
Well, to me, this is an example of what my need is, because I looked at it. I didn't look at the calendar as part of the goal setting or student outcomes, but I wasn't sure. And see right here, Mr. Jordan, he felt it was. Well, that's what I think. That's what I think I kept out. What I was asking Cindy was, that's what I don't have an understanding of. Does the calendar count for student outcomes? I thought no, but other people thought yes. So I think we all need to have a common definition of what each of those mean, so that we can have a together discussion where we're understanding it. And that's this turned out to be a perfect example of what I was saying. That was my concern and my problem.
Yeah. So let's
someone read.
Yeah, go ahead, AJ.
Somebody read for us the description of goal monitoring on the evaluation form.
I'll read it. Reviewing, discussing, and or approving guardrail. I'm sorry, reading the wrong one. Reviewing, discussing, and or approving or not approving goal monitoring reports in accordance with the monitoring calendar. I interpreted that to mean we do have a calendar where different reports are supposed to be presented to us. It's in the accountability plan, which is difficult to follow now, of course. We just got our kids back into in-person. But so I was looking at things that had to do with those goals, which were in the past. And as much as the superintendent can possibly do it now with the pandemic, the reports that we do get that talk about student achievement benchmarks that head toward a goal, those kinds of things. And so that's how I was interpreting it. I would have been broad enough to consider, attendance because that has an impact on student outcomes, but not other things like a calendar. But I wasn't sure. I wasn't sure.
So the key here is, did you receive a monitoring report on one of your goals? And did you receive that monitoring report on one of your goals in accordance with your goal monitoring calendar? If those things happen, then yes, that sounds like that's something I would identify as goal monitoring. If those two things did not happen, then I would say, no, that's not something that I identify as goal monitoring.
But when you're talking, oh, I'm sorry.
I'm sorry. So as you're thinking about the example that you're giving, if those two things happen, was there a goal monitoring report that you received that was in accordance with your goal monitoring calendar?
All right. So the goal monitoring, so if it's at the date that a calendar is supposed to be done, like the calendar for next year, would that count, even though it doesn't seem to me that impacts outcomes?
So is adopting a calendar giving you information about whether or not your children are accomplishing your goals?
No.
No. So that is not a monitoring report on your goals. So there are two criteria here. Did you receive a report about progress relative to your goals? And did you receive that report in accordance with the monitoring calendar that you set? So in the example you give, did that happen?
Not in that one, but in other words, because I thought I was looking for academic goals. And I think, and so I'm not, because student outcomes are not always academic goals.
It's not about academic goals, it's about student outcomes. So what goals did you set for student outcomes, what students know and are able to do? And that could be in academic areas, or that could be in other non-academic areas.
Could it be in attendance, for example?
So it depends. I would not consider first grade attendance a student outcome.
Yeah, and see, whereas I would think, because we've done a lot of research on it, and we find that attendance has a great impact on student outcomes.
Yeah, but we're not talking about what had an impact on student outcome. We're talking about the actual student outcomes. So the reason I don't consider first grade attendance student outcomes is because I don't hold first graders accountable for getting themselves to school every day.
Right. See, this is what I need. I need to be much more clear, and because I can see why other people would pick things that are different than what I'm choosing.
Yeah.
So it doesn't seem like we're all aligned and together.
So the underlying question is, are we measuring what you have defined in advance or things that students should know and be able to do? So did you previously identify as one of your goals that first graders should be able to get to school?
Yeah, attendance is a goal. It's been a goal for us on what we have.
So the board adopted an attendance goal.
Yes, we do have an attendance goal.
So now the question is that a student outcome goal or an adult outcome goal?
Yeah, and I can see that, and it's different at first grade than it is in high school.
Right, which is why I started by asking about.
But I don't think we've differentiated it. I don't think that's been differentiated because I've never thought of it. I've always just thought of attendance is important. If they're not here, we can't teach them.
Well, so you're not going to come across anything that's like wholly unimportant. Like whether or not they get proper nutrition in school is important. That's not a student outcome. You know, whether or not the staff has been treated in appropriate disciplinary strategies is important. That's not a student outcome. I mean, so everything's going to have an influence. That we're not looking for everything that can possibly influence it. That's not our definition. Our definition is what goals did the board set regarding what students should know and be able to do. And then once the board has set those, to what extent did you receive a report monitoring progress toward those goals on the timeline that you said you wanted those goals monitored? And so when those things happen, that's when we say that you spent time monitoring goals. And if those things didn't happen, then we'd say you didn't spend time on it. You may have in fact been engaged in a random act of governance, but that's distinct from having been engaged in monitoring your goals. That's all.
So it seems like it might be a good idea for as a board for us to get together and go through one of our meetings together, so we could kind of talk that out to make sure that we're all on the same page. That we're not I'm not going to use the word misinterpreting. I would say not interpreting it the same. I mean, that would be helpful to me. because I really agonized over, I mean, I had 2 meetings I was looking at, and I was putting everything as zeros because I was thinking of it as purely academic, which you're now, and I can see it's not always academic. It's hard for me to think that because I'm always so, my outcomes are usually academic.
Yeah, in most places they are. That's correct. All we're clarifying is goals are about student outcomes, and most of the time that tends to be academic. But in some cases, boards choose non-academic goals, and that's perfectly fine as long as it is a measure of what students, not adults, know and are able to do. And if it's apt, then we'd say it's eligible to be a goal.
So for right now, we look at the goals we currently have, even though I know we're getting ready to make those changes as we move into this. But for now, look at that. And so we have our priorities, I guess, would be goals. We have 10 priorities, 9, because one is definitely not student-centered. So, okay. So I'll look at that when I'm trying it next time. But it would be helpful if anyone would like to get together and do some of these together. That would maybe get us more online so that we're thinking of them the same. Because I think that's important for us if we're going to be doing this work, that we're all in the same rule book.
Yeah. And
whatever it is, I don't, I'm not deciding myself, but that's a group decision that we need to make. Does this count? Does this count? Because we definitely have a calendar that we used to always did a good job of sticking to as far as reports back, but this has been a pandemic. And so,
and here's the thing, as Cindy said earlier, anytime, that there's some type of uncertainty, feel free to, reach out, shoot us a text, shoot us an email, and Cindy and I are happy to hop on the phone or hop on a Zoom and walk through it. Cindy, I think you had a few other hands wanted to jump in.
Yeah, Mr. Clinton. I see your hands.
All right, can you guys hear me? Good. All right, cool. So just based on that exchange and discussion there, I'm just trying to figure out now where this falls in, because there are certain things that the Department of Education has established. And one of those things is being attendance. When we talk about accreditation for the school division, because our State Department has determined that that is a major factor that we have to pay attention to. And also we've moved from this very punitive thing of just, testing, but also improvement. So I'm trying to figure out, now my mind's just kind of going in, well, how does that all kind of come together based on what we're doing there?
Yeah, we're not suggesting it's unimportant. We're just asking you the question, what are your goals for student outcomes? And then are you spending time actually monitoring those goals?
Okay.
And so does that mean the only thing that's important are your goals? No, in fact, when you look at the framework, that's why our recommendation is to try to spend about half of your time each month really figuring out, are we getting anything useful done for children? Like that, when we say monitoring your goals, put it in different language. How much of your time do you think you should spend figuring out if all the stuff that you're doing, all the money you're spending, all the adult time that's invested, should you ever spend time looking to see if any of that is making a difference in the lives of children? If you think the answer to that is yes, then what you want to do is goal monitoring. So now the only question we're asking is, how much of your time are you investing in goal monitoring? But we don't recommend, that you spend all of your time there. What we'd suggest is that boards that really want to drive performance improvements for students will try to invest about half of their time each month there. But what you do with the other half of your time, that's entirely, a local context will drive what you do with the remainder of your time.
Mr. Jordan?
Thank you. I just wanted to say a couple of things. One, this is the first time that we've done this, so I think that's fine. I think doing it as an individual is a good thing, because that's how, as trainers, I think you get to see how we are assessing the homework, and then we get to see how, from each other, how we're assessing the homework. The other thing I just wanted to clarify for me, it wasn't my assessment that the voting on the calendar itself was about student outcomes. What I was noting was that within the discussion around the calendar, we started having some conversations around whether or not we thought how the calendar could impact student outcomes and student achievement. So that's why in my notes section, I just noted a few minutes within that however long hour conversation we may have had, that a few minutes in there, I thought we were focused on some student outcomes for a moment. And that's what I was trying to note. So I just wanted to clarify that both for my colleagues to know that I think moving forward, that there's value in each individual doing their own assessment rather than, and then having conversations like this that then allow us to see how each of us takes the assignment and how we are perceiving the definitions, and then you all can help us to get on that same page. So thank you.
Yeah. I would not describe that as having anything to do with monitoring your goals.
Appreciate it.
Yeah, the challenge is, did you come away from that conversation having received some type of report that gives you some type of data that helps you understand whether or not your children are getting the promises that you've made to them? And so it sounds like the conversation you're having, which is a totally appropriate conversation to have, was you're kind of theorizing around, if we pull this lever, if we do this adult input, we think it will impact this student outcome. And that's an entirely appropriate conversation to have. But as a result of that conversation, you have no additional insights into whether or not your children are actually achieving or not, relative to your goals. And so if the conversation is, we think these inputs will impact these outcomes, that's a great conversation to have. We would just say it is completely distinct from monitoring goals in that it doesn't give you additional data that clarifies, here is where our students' performance have shifted relative to our existing goals. It's saying, here are the things that we want to do to try to cause that shift to occur. In that regard, we'd say that was a conversation about adult inputs, actually, not a conversation about adult outcomes. It's a conversation about what will adults do to cause student outcomes, which is by definition an adult input conversation. You're talking about what we're going to start doing. That's usually this giveaway that we're really still at the input phase. We're going to start doing this, and then there will be some inputs, and then we'll get some preliminary data around that. That'll be our outputs. And then at the end of the year, we'll see if it made the impact we want. That's when we'll know our outcomes.
For the record, I accept your definition for the exercise. When I read ands and ors,
yeah,
and part of it was discussion, the piece that I pulled out was a point where I felt we were dealing with our accountability plan and monitoring our goals during a brief portion of a conversation around the calendar.
So you say in the goal, during that conversation, you were in fact receiving new data about how are we doing relative to our goals.
That was my interpretation as I was reviewing the video.
Gotcha. I know Tanya, I saw your hand up as well.
Oh, well, I lowered my hand because I think we kind of touched a little bit on it, but and I guess one of the things I didn't put any minutes down, but I did make a notation because I took it literal, the description literally for what it stated here. And one of the notes that I made was that we need to establish a monitoring calendar, which is what we have, this board, has talked a lot about over, time and time again, about having a board calendar that would drive the agenda development, which is tied to the accountability plan. And so that's what I was referring to in how I processed this particular line for this task. So I just wanted to share that piece.
Yeah, and that is something that as part of this, and it should be reflected on the implementation timeline as well, that the superintendent, as you write your goals and guardrails, and she provides those interim goals and guardrails, will be developing a monitoring calendar in conjunction with that, so that you will have, for that exact reason, know when during the year you'll be receiving those reports, and that will lend itself to that agenda planning process. So spot on that. Anyone else have questions on that first, on the goal monitoring section? Okay, Then we move into values and guardrails. The first one, guardrail setting. Who will read the descriptor for guardrail setting?
I'll read it.
Thank you.
It says reviewing, discussing, and or selecting guardrails.
And is everyone clear on that? Did anyone have any minutes on that? All right, need any further definition?
Right, we don't have any guardrails yet.
Right.
I mean, I have ones in my own mind, but I don't think that's what we're talking about.
Right. Yep. So yeah, correct.
So basically, it seemed like the only thing I could put there when I saw guardrails was zeros, because I know that's where we're headed. That's the part I've been waiting for, is to start talking about guardrails. But I know we have to get our goals first.
Yeah, and I did notice a couple of you had noted on yours that not set yet, and
that was
had
me.
zeros in there.
Yeah.
Mr. Clanton.
Yeah, but well, I guess for the purposes of right now, I mean, would guardrails also be considered the same thing as what we've already identified as priorities right now?
So what I would say is that when we're discussing, I'm sorry. Guardrails would be those specific prohibitions on superintendent activity, at the non-negotiable things that the superintendent needs to honor while getting to the goals. So your priorities might fit into that goal category right now, but probably not the guardrail category.
Okay.
And that's okay. I mean, the guardrails are not a typical, a lot of boards don't operate with guardrails. So we wouldn't necessarily expect you to have them. And I am glad to hear that well, at least Lauren, I know, is excited to work on those guardrails. So that will be something in your near future. Okay, so the next one is the guardrail monitoring then. Will someone read that description? Carlos.
Guardrail monitoring, reviewing, discussing, and or not accepting guardrail monitoring reports in accordance with the monitoring calendar.
Yeah. So in that monitoring calendar that we talked about, that will be coming, we'll also have the guardrail monitoring reports as part of that, because when you write the guardrails, the superintendent will also come with interim guardrail measures as well, and have those based on when that data is available. That will help determine when those will happen throughout the year.
Yeah,
on the calendar.
And so I'm hearing where we're going, but I mean, we've had some of these things, but I know that we're now moving into an acceptance of more focus on the student outcome piece and in our meetings. But it's not like we haven't had a monitoring calendar, but I guess is what we've been using for now. But now we're saying we're trying to shift. But we've had a monitoring calendar where we've had certain things that needed to go on the agenda at a certain time. But now we're going to, if I'm hearing correctly, with the guardrails and these other things that we established, those are going to now be inputted into what this calendar would look like and what we should be focusing in helping the development of our agendas on a monthly basis, right?
That's
Am I
correct.
understanding that? Okay.
Yeah, and Carlos, I would add on to that. You all started ahead of where a lot of the boards are that we see. Like, you all had a clear set of board goals and board priorities that the board had in fact adopted. Mm-hmm. That act alone puts you ahead of many of your peers across the country. Okay. You took the next step and you actually had some type of indicators for many of these. Having indicators for those sets you ahead of most of your colleagues across the country. And then you did have some type of calendar for presentations, which again puts you ahead of many of your colleagues. So you all are not starting kind of at the deficit that is normative. You all are already kind of at this, good, place. you all are trying to figure out, how do we sharpen this knife? Like, how do we go from what we've been using, and is there another level that will give us even more clarity around what is working and what is not working for our children, and delivered to us in a way that will allow us to make better decisions as a governing body. So it's not like we're going from the floor, to the table. Like, we're going from above the table, and try to hit the ceiling. And so it's more a matter, I think of, when I look at where you all started, it's more a matter of taking the knife you got and sharpening this thing up to the point where you all can really, really, really have more clarity around, are we causing the blessing in the lives of children that we intend? And where we're not, are we finding out about that early enough that we can cause pivots to happen in our district's operations? And right now, I think you all started with a lot of the basic pieces, but watching your meetings, like I said, I went back as far as 2019. I don't know how far back Cindy went. I saw almost nothing to suggest that you all were leveraging the full power of the things that you had adopted. There was some amount of adoption, but then that's where things started to grind to a halt. And when you watch your board meetings, I realized that, there's some frustration, like, oh, well, this board meeting didn't have much, but there's some others. No, I kind of rebuke that. When I go back all the way to 2019 and watch as many meetings as I did, this board has not demonstrated a habit of using the tools that it has already adopted. And so a large part of what we're talking about, let's sharpen the tools, but then let's also put in the processes that are just the new drumbeat of how the board engages, so that month in and month out, you have crystal clarity. What are my expectations for my students? To what extent are those more true or less this month than they were last month? And what's being done about it? And so that's the main pivot point here. It's not like you all are just trash. It's like you have something, let's strengthen it, and then let's use it to its maximum capacity.
So with that statement and in that definition there, I can go with that, because I just didn't want there to be this feeling that there weren't things that weren't being done. I think that really the agreement has really been that, how do we get better? How can we be more focused using the time that we come here? And I will assume at some particular point, as we begin to unpack things, we'll even talk about strategies of how to better use our time in the meetings to be more focused on, in discussion, strategies on what we can do before we get to the meetings, so that we can really be focused on those items and taking care of the business.
Yeah, and it's actually part of, if you look at your implementation timeline, part of this is a complete overhaul of your existing meeting structure. And when I say meeting structure, I mean every minute that the board has created throughout the month. This is all of your kind of committees, task forces, whatever you got, work sessions, business sessions, all of it. Take all of that and start to reimagine it from a blank sheet of paper of, if we were going to start with the intention of being focused on our student outcomes, if we're going to have that be center, and then we're going to design everything else in a way to help us have the largest influence on that, what would that look like? And then once we've got that designed, what other things do we need to do? And let's let those fill in the gaps. What I would suggest is happening right now is smaller things that are of much lesser leverage impact on the well-being of your children have taken up the corpus of all of your meetings across all of the different things you do. And then every now and then around the edges, Rodney finds one little smidgen of thing that was actually focused on something that you all had said you're going to talk about. That we're going to flip this. You've got small rocks acting like big rocks, and big rocks, they are the size of a grain of sand. And all we're saying is, let's sharpen up your tools, and then let's flip that dynamic where we put the big rock in first, student outcomes, and then all of the other stuff that you all want to get done, then let's figure out how it fits in to the structure that you all want to create. And so it's, there are resources, there are assets to leverage, but the hard work will be, are you willing to give up the ineffectiveness that you currently indulge in to get access to the effectiveness that you actually originally intended? Because the intentions are quite clear. Like I said, you have things in place that most other boards haven't even thought about yet. So the intentions are super clear. Now the problem is you have now built up, you've habituated around things that don't honor your intentions. And the real question is going to come, will you all be willing to give up the things you've habituated around in order to get access to the things that you've originally said is what you wanted in the first place, but just never kind of actualized? And so just be prepared for that challenge. It will feel very, very uncomfortable. Like if you don't feel uncomfortable at some point in this process, Cindy and I probably missed a step. Like it is normal for this process to feel uncomfortable, to say we're going to stop doing these things and either start doing them something else entirely, or we're going to do these in a different way so that we can free up time to do this. But so that's what's coming. That's where this is all leading to.
Okay, so the guardrail monitoring, we just talked about that descriptor, and rather than going through line by line, how about, is there anything else on the evaluation form that anybody has questions or needs further clarification as far as the descriptions or anything else to do with the form itself, or how they determined their answer in that section? No others? Yeah. The other thing I will offer as well is that whenever you have a question regarding a definition, those are the descriptions, the words that are used in the descriptions, that glossary is all, those terms and definitions are also in the Student Outcomes Focused Governance Manual. And so that's always a resource that you have for further definition and clarification as well. Okay, anything else on the time use evaluation then? Okay, so another item that we had on the list to do today is an agenda use evaluation. So the idea with the agenda evaluation is looking at some of those processes as that determine what it is that the board is going to spend its time on in each meeting, and also again, like the time use evaluation reveals to the extent to which the board is actually focused on student outcomes, focused on the priorities, and leveraging what it is that you said you want to do, and want the outcomes for your students to be, how you're leveraging your time to actually accomplish that. So what we're going to do is actually just take a look back at that February 17th agenda. Does everyone have that in front of them? Okay, and we're just going to go through that actually line by line, and talk about that. And just again, before we get into this exercise, just making sure that you understand that it's for reflection. This exercise is for reflection and brainstorming. It's not a time to rehash any of the issues that were discussed on the agenda. That we are having a conversation, and don't get stuck on any one thing or item that a colleague might bring up. We're going to brainstorm some thoughts on what potentially could happen with the agenda instead. And again, I think AJ mentioned it before, but I'll say it again, that we're not suggesting or telling the board how to use its time, or how to spend its time. That's going to be your choice, but it's reflecting on how you are spending your time so that you can look at potential ways of making what it is that you are doing, what you need to do, more efficient, what you're required to do by law, that might not be student outcomes focused, and making some of those processes more efficient so you can spend more time on the priorities that you define. So if everyone has that in front of them, this is how it's going to go. We're going to actually go line by line. So the first item on that agenda is call to order. And is this item student outcomes focused or not? It's not. Yeah. So then the next question I would ask is, do you want to keep it? Do you want to delete it? Or do you want to modify it?
I think we have to do it.
Required.
It's
It's
required.
required by law.
Required by law?
Yes.
Calling the meeting to order is required by law. So I'm hearing keep it. And okay, anybody, Mr. Jordan?
Yeah, I'm not sure it's required by law, but I think because we've said we would govern ourselves by Robert's rules, we have the call to order there. So I think it's just it's something that we do. I'm not sure it's something that we're required to do.
Yeah.
I would hold it there because it brings the board to order. But after we do our analysis, if there's places where we could cut, that might be someplace, but it only takes 30 seconds or so.
Yeah, I'm glad you jumped in because I was actually about to say the same thing. I'm not clear that that's required by law. It may, but it's interesting to me that everybody thinks it is. And so I don't know if you got an attorney handy that you kind of keep in a cubby hole somewhere. But I generally find
Let me see.
this.
Yeah, come on out.
Come on out. But I generally find that there are a bunch of things that are on agendas, and when we go through this activity, everybody's, why do we do this? Oh, well, that's the law, and that's the answer for like half the activities. And then we ask the attorney, and it actually turned out to be the answer for 0 of the items on the agenda. And so, before you jump in to say something is required by law, double check to make sure it is. And if it's not, that doesn't mean you delete it. I just want you all to be clear about what things you are legally obligated to do versus what things you aren't, because that's important that you know what freedoms you have and what freedoms you don't.
So, and I'm not going to belabor it. I'll definitely like to put that in the parking lot on that particular item when we do have our attorney here. But I think it would be within a cross-reference in the respect that we're also required to do minutes. And as far as an official governing board within the Commonwealth of Virginia, we have to show that there's a clear start time when that started, along with the date and time. And then following behind that with the roll call, who was present, to ensure that you did have a quorum. And there has to be a clear ending to whatever business was taken. So when we do have our attorney, I'd like to just kind of go back to that, but I do believe that is codified in the Commonwealth of Virginia.
Yeah, and just to be clear, no decisions are being made today, and no one's voting on anything, and nothing's going to change today. Just want to be clear about that. But this is just an opportunity to have the conversation and do a little brainstorming and exploring and discovery, I guess, on the agenda. Okay, so the next item is roll call. Is this student outcomes focused or not? So the question I'd have is keep, delete, or modify. Keep.
Yeah, keep it.
Keep it. Okay. Then the next item is 2.01 NPS return to in-person learning update. Is this student outcomes focused? And recalling their definition of student outcomes, is it student outcomes focused or not?
So this is, I'm sorry, Cindy, this is where I kind of interject, because at the top of this agenda, it's really 3 distinct kind of like meetings that are happening in on this one agenda here.
So this is your school board workshop.
Yeah, so a workshop is typically a lot less informal, a lot less formal. And it's typically information for us. We don't really take, many times we don't do action. It's more to inform the board of from the administration, certain things. And then of course, executive session is exactly what it's saying. It's something that's not necessarily in front of a public, but that the board has to take care of. And we're probably meeting with legal counsel. And then we have the business meeting. I mean, I understand with the tool that's there, and it might go back to what AJ was mentioning earlier, and that there may be some things that we may look at, hey, we have all these different things, and based on where we're going, we may not do these. But I just wanted to kind of clarify, I mean, for us, that we're probably, it could be in that workshop if it was talking about academic performance and things like that. But I think for this particular point, it was just about returning to school more operation.
Right. I'd like to add to that. That's exactly what I'm thinking. Because when I first looked at this, I actually have it highlighted because I thought, aha, this is where I'm going to get my student outcomes. But of course it was, well, student learning. I mean, person student learning, that sounded to me like I was going to get some student outcomes in there, which I only got a couple of minutes thanks to Ms. Basine, because she did bring up something about data dashboards. But in here, this is exactly what we expected and needed. Sometimes there are, and I'm a huge student outcome person, but sometimes you need, and this is what we needed for the board to know and for our parents to know, what were the what was the structure of the return to school? Were we doing hybrid or full? And what were all the mitigations that we had done? So yeah, I thought so. It ran a little over because we had a lot of questions that maybe went a little bit in the weeds for the details, but this was what we would expect. But many times we're listening to a report out from the reading people, letting us know what they're doing with strategies and things like that. So it's kind of, it was a disappointment I didn't get any outcomes here because I wanted to get some minutes in, but I could see why this happened. I don't think you would see the entire work session in something that was totally non-student outcome usually. I think that usually we sometimes get too deep in the weeds and details, but very often these would be student outcomes. But there was a reason here. We have this pandemic thing that keeps messing up what we're doing. So anyway, I just wanted to add that. That's why I wasn't as upset about that here of the student outcomes, because we needed to know all this mitigation stuff. We needed to know the organization of the return to school and things like that.
Okay, so I think what I heard from you is that it is not student outcomes focused, but it is something you would keep for all of those reasons that you mentioned, that it was something that was needed, that you needed to hear about the student plan to return to in-person learning and all of the operational issues.
Right. Yes, sometimes the details that we asked for and talked about a long time were more in the weeds, below the level that the board needed, but we needed this kind of discussion. We just need to know how to define what we need, how deep we need to go on details.
Okay. Anybody else? Keep, delete, or modify. Mr. Jordan.
Yeah, I see it differently. I think it can go away. The context, as I see it, we spent, as you all said, you went back through previous meetings. We spent a significant amount of time at previous meetings coming up with a plan for our students through the pandemic. What triggered this agenda item was the governor and the state was strongly encouraging school divisions who were in an all virtual environment to begin to return students to in-person learning by a certain date. The only reason that this item was on that agenda for that day, in my opinion, was in an effort to try to respond to the request and urging that was coming from the governor and the state at the time. We had previously, I think a couple of weeks earlier, had a plan, worked on phasing and all those types of things. So to me, this is a event-driven agenda item, and it would not be on the regular agenda. And from time to time, there may be things, emergencies, hurricanes, who knows, that may require something like this. But on this particular agenda, in my view, this item was there in response to requests that were coming from the state. And that's why it was more focused on, in my opinion, many operational things, because we were looking at how do we then shift what the board had already agreed to based upon the superintendent's recommendation. How do we then shift that based upon the request that we were receiving from the state. So I wouldn't keep it here. And I think the only reason it's on that February 17th agenda item is for the reasons that I stated.
Okay, Tanya, I see your hand. Thank you, Rodney. You just shifted. Okay. Did you have?
Oh, there you go. My hand up was to state exactly what Rodney just mentioned. I wanted to give the context as to why we had that workshop. And I too don't believe that during our business meeting agenda that we need to have the workshop portion included for the agenda.
Okay, so you're saying the workshop portion does not need to be included. So are you saying the workshop still needs to happen but does not need to be included on the agenda? Did I hear
No, that we don't need to have a workshop during that meeting unless, you know, circumstances call for that need, such as what happened on February 17th. There may be circumstances that we may need to have that workshop. Sometimes we do it historically. It's been, you know, budget season where we need to maybe fit in additional extra time to discuss the budget. Those are some other times that we have had a workshop during our business meeting, but typically I would not include a workshop on that date, on the business meeting date.
It wasn't during the business meeting.
It was during the business meeting.
Business meetings doesn't start until 7, and this is at 4 o'clock.
Yeah, but it was our business meeting date.
Okay.
So again, we're not gonna. This is a discussion and not hanging on to everyone. We're exploring thoughts and ideas on how we might become more efficient, and so thank you for that, Tanya. Adele.
Okay, I recall this very differently because I distinctly remember that our administration had already been planning a plan to return to in-person, and it just so happened that the governor just before this meeting announced his plans, and completely independently of what our administration had already been doing. And at our work session, when our administration presented their plan, we were looking at bringing our teachers back to the schoolhouse on March 1st. So then this is February 17th. So at that work session, not this one, the one 2 weeks prior, there were some recommendations made. And so we needed to vote on this at this business meeting. And that is the only reason we combined the work session presentation, was to get an update on to see how those recommendations that we had made to the administration were then implemented into the plan, so that we can then vote on the February 17th to give the administration and our principals and staff enough time to then roll in to the schoolhouse by March 1st and start preparing to welcome students back 2 weeks later. I try not to have a work session, have an item that we're going to vote on, get information about it on the same day. This was a unique circumstance.
Okay.
And also, whenever we're planning the work session agenda items, I don't just say, oh, this is just for information. You know, I explain it to make sure that we give priority to agenda items on the work session that we will be voting on at the business session.
Okay. So this sounds to me like a unique situation based on what was happening at the state level and what the governor was requiring of the district as far as return to in-person learning. No?
We always have work sessions before
What happened was,
I'm talking about this item.
We were already working, the administration was already working on a plan to return to the schoolhouse. And as we were about to vote on this, the Friday before, I think it was, the governor came out with his plan, which is very much our plan was already in line, it's very much in line with what we were already doing. So, that's part of the politicization, I said that right, of this whole pandemic, was that we're moving ahead, our administration's moving ahead, making plans, and then our governor would get the spotlight on, oh, well, I came up with this idea. Let's all, I want you all to do this. Well, we were already doing that, so that's where it seems like it was. I remember having the conversation of, everyone's like, oh, now that the governor came out and said that you have to go back to school, now you're doing it. And our response was, no, we were already planning to do this. We just have to wait for our next meeting to actually talk about it in public. So,
okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you for that background. All right. So let's just pivot, because we've kind of gotten off topic. And what I don't want to do here is to rehash every agenda item. And the idea is to think about maybe not the exact, like why that was there. I think what is going to be best at this point is just to move to the next item. And this is something that it sounds like the board had in a unique situation in response to what was happening, perhaps with the return to learn at the state level, and wanted to respond with what they were doing themselves. So what I will, let's move on from here, because I don't think this is productive at this point. So motion to enter into closed executive session. Is this student outcomes focused or not? Yeah,
It's required.
It's procedural.
A procedural item.
Procedural.
Okay. Let's jump up to the business meeting. Let's just jump right there to the business meeting, 7 p.m. We've discussed call to order and welcome and roll call on the previous meeting. And so let's go to item 4.03, Pledge of Allegiance. Is this student outcomes focused or not?
No.
No, that is ceremonial.
No, it's ceremonial.
It's ceremonial. So keep, delete, or modify?
Keep.
Keep it. Keep it. I see the general consensus there is to keep that.
But I guess you could stretch it for students, because typically our student rep does it.
Usually have a student rep do it.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Well, I have a question
Sure.
for you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
From your observation, do most school boards do the Pledge of Allegiance?
It varies.
Oh.
I've seen many school boards do it, but I've also seen a number of school boards not do it. I think AJ would tell you in Texas, school boards not only do the Pledge of Allegiance, but they do a pledge to the Texas flag as well. So yeah, it varies.
Prayer,
yeah.
Pledge of Allegiance to the U.S. flag, Pledge of Allegiance to the Texas flag.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
God, country, and the nation of Texas.
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay, thank you.
You said it.
Okay. So then the next item, 4.04, student musical performances. Is this student outcomes focused or not?
I think it is, because we're seeing a student perform using what she's been taught in music in that class. So I think it gives us a chance to see the outcome of the instruction that's being done and to spotlight the achievement of our musical students.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Noelle.
And I would also say that in our accountability plan, we did want to focus on telling the NPS story, so the successful outcomes of our students. And this was a way for us to showcase our students and their achievements in a variety of different fashions, because we were looking to highlight more than just academic things, but also extracurricular items. So while it doesn't necessarily on face value correlate with like moving the needle on literacy ratings, I think it does tie into a student outcome.
And it's part of the instructional program for the arts,
That's
which
true.
we have. So this is not extracurricular necessarily, because it's learning it during kids. It's a learning. I mean, I'm a big everyone knows me in academics, but also what they accomplish in other things that they've learned during the school day. She didn't just do all that at home. She did it with the guidance of an excellent teacher to get each of these performances done. There's a teacher there teaching and coaching and doing all of those things.
Okay. I see Rodney's hand, then Tanya, then I think Adele had her hand raised.
The student musical performance came straight from Quinn's Peak Performing Governance team book. And the recommendation was twofold, as has been mentioned. One is to remind the board why we are here, which is to focus on students. And the second was to give an opportunity to also showcase our student talent. But the intent we didn't always have this on the agenda, and it got added to try to do what I think you all are trying to get us to do, which is to focus the attention on students and not on adults. And that's why that was added.
Yep. Thank you. Tanya.
Thank you. So a couple of things. One, I think, and forgive me if I missed it. So going back to our call to order and welcome of the business portion of the meeting, I'm not sure that, so we do another call to order and then the welcome. So that's that part, when I kind of added up all the minutes between that the opening and then the musical performance, which was about that was 10 minutes. But anyway, when I would like to see the opening of the meeting. I think that could be shortened and more concise. As for the student performance piece, I think it's great. I think, just as Mr. Jordan just mentioned, it does remind the board of why we're there. I would like to see us be more inclusive of other opportunities for showcasing student work. Right now, it's limited to musical performances, and I'd like us to be more inclusive of other things, that our students are achieving. So that's something that I'll just put out there in the parking lot for us to discuss in the future.
So I'm hearing you say modify that opening as well as the performance aspect.
Well, not the performance
who's
itself.
Included?
Well, yeah, because we have kids that may not be musicians, but they may have entered an art contest, or may be in future problem solvers and going to the state competition, or maybe in other school-based activities, and aren't being able to showcase their involvements. So right now we're limiting it to just our musical students, which is not necessarily inclusive of all the different things that our students are doing. So that's all I'm saying.
Okay. Adele.
Just want to remind everyone that with our Pledge of Allegiance, for example, our student rep leads the room in the Pledge of Allegiance, but our ROTC, we have ROTC groups from each of our schools that come in and actually lead us in that. They carry the flag. And so that's part of the ceremony of our Pledge of Allegiance. And while we have the musical performances from our students on every business agenda, we also recognize the achievements of debate teams, of our athletics. So we do include other students I do agree with Ms. Basine that we can broaden that inclusion and recognize more accomplishments in our arts and so forth. And future problem solving, I think, is an excellent example of a very well-run program that we do. And we have students who go, very far, sometimes internationally with that program. So there are other ways that aren't necessarily on the agenda that are occurring when we're in a normal business meeting setting.
Okay. Let's move to the next. Go ahead.
We jump, sorry, I can't help myself. What's the benefit? Student musical performance, what's the benefit? Yeah, Laura?
Well, I think there's a benefit to it because I think when it showcases what you're able to accomplish, it shows other students that they too can do things like that, they may not be great in academics, but they have other skills and other talents that they can do. And I certainly agree with Ms. Basine. It probably should be more open instead of just musical. I know there were times in the past they used to do it. It's harder to showcase something that you just talk about. But I can remember when I had Maritime Rangers, those kids came in and did a presentation like this, and they actually, had a little slideshow and things, and they showed the things they were doing out in the maritime forest for the environment. So there are other ways you can do it, but it's like it's a show it lets other students know the possibilities.
Yeah, I don't think that holds water at all. I suspect there are very few other students watching board meetings.
Really? Gee, that's a disappointment.
Well, I guess the question is,
I see what you're saying. But I just love recognizing kids
as elementary students or middle school students. And so I'm pushing on this for a reason. It's probably not the reason you think. It's not because I hate music. But I'm curious, what is the benefit? Like, really unpack this. Noelle, what do you think? What's the benefit?
It is definitely what Mr. Jordan described as far as bringing student attention and focus to the meeting as a very obvious visual as to why we are here. But it also originated to when we used to have an audience here of stakeholders that would come to our meetings. It would allow the student to perform for them and show them, the incredible talents of our students. And it would kind of set the tone sometimes for the meeting that was about to take place. So it really was an opportunity for us to start with a student, which is why we are here, and to hopefully carry on the mission of trying to be student-led and student-focused.
All right, so if we're saying that part of the benefit here is that it helps us be focused, then my question becomes, then the observation behind that is, everything that you do as a board is culture setting. Every single decision, whether you intend it or not, is establishing the cultural norms, the cultural expectations for your organization. Such is the power of school boards, that when you meet, you are saying to people, here's what matters most. Here's what matters more than other things. Every time you meet and every time you do something, that is your vote of saying this matters more than the 100 other things that we could have been talking about with our time. So a thing that I'm curious about, is it this kind of leans into a little bit of what Tanya was saying. Is it your assertion that the area of student outcomes that you believe is more important than all other student outcomes is the area of music? And so I want you to reflect on everything you do is culture creating, and you are saying what things are more important, what things are more valuable than others, and how you behave. And so I'm actually a huge proponent of having students in board meetings, specifically for the reason you described. I completely discard the notion that it's for their benefit. I don't buy that for a second. Like, if I really wanted to lift students up and have them feel the full weight of being honored, like if I wanted students to feel to be the most excited about being honored, who would I honor them in front of?
Their peers.
Their peers.
Their peers.
Their peers. Pulling them down to a board meeting is not the highest level of honoring for them. If I really wanted them to experience feeling honored, then I would leave my dais, go to their school, and honor them in front of their peers. Same thing with your teachers. If I really wanted them to feel the highest level of honor, I would leave my dais, go to their school, and honor them in front of their peers. And so that's why I set that aside. But I do think this idea of values, of culture setting, of priority establishing is a critical thing that the board does. And I agree. Clint, I think he's a smart guy. I get the chance to chat with him every now and then. We'll nerd out on stuff. And I think he joined me in this assessment that this is about culture creation. And so all I would encourage you to really lean into is what messages do we want to send? And do they align with the things that we say are most important? So on one hand, you're saying, here are the things that we say are most important, but then none of your actions seem to line up with that. You're not monitoring it, and you're certainly not lifting it up in the students that you're recognizing. So I start to question, are the things you say important really the things that you think are important? Because your actions don't seem to, it's hard for me to connect the dots between what you were doing and what you were saying. And so just put that out there, consider. There are absolutely ways to center students and their needs in a board meeting. And I think including students in a board meeting for that purpose is a powerful opportunity. But which students you recognize is meaningful. I'll give you one example, and then I'll let you all sort out the mess that I've thrown out here. On my board, one of the goals that we set was around growth in third grade literacy, not proficiency, but growth. And so on our regular agenda, we would have whichever one of our goals we were monitoring, we have students show up who exemplify that. And so it's third grade growth monitoring night, and we roll in with the 10 third graders who had demonstrated the most growth over the last period. And they come, walking in, and, we recognize the parents, recognize the, staff, thank them for all their hard work, and I say, any of you want to share a little bit about your journey? This young sister, she all the swagger she comes straight to the microphone. She ready. Like she knew her moment to shine was coming. She came straight to the microphone. I was like, all right, well, tell us about, why you're here and how it is that you show so much growth. And she broke it down, and she explained how she started behind, but with her teacher, she set goals for how to grow. And then she met that, and then she exceeded that. I said, all right, well, you sound like hot stuff. What about the rest of your class? Oh, well, I'm working with them now. I'm making sure there are students who are behind. I'm helping them catch up too, so that our whole class could be great. I mean, she had all the answers. It's like, have you considered being a superintendent? Because she was ready. In that moment, what we signaled to the rest of our staff was, if you want to stand in the sunshine with this board, the sunshine is available most to those who are getting it done for our students in the areas that we as a board have described as priorities. And so that's one way of using this opportunity to really lift up and praise students. And so I would just challenge you to just be really thoughtful. What's the benefit? What are we really trying to accomplish? You want to do this with every item on this agenda. This same conversation we're having, I could break it down for every single item on your agenda. I want you to be real clear. What is the benefit? Who is the beneficiary? And if we were going to do it a different way to try to get more benefit and more focus on our goals, what might that look like? And so I just wanted to put that out there, not to suggest that you don't recognize one thing or the other, but to suggest be intentional about everything, question everything, and look for what is the way to create alignment in my actions with the things that I have said as a board. That alignment is tenuous at best in a lot of your meetings now, but everything you do could connect that dot for folks. You'd have to be creative in how you design that, but it could. And I just encourage you to be thinking about that as Cindy leads you through this.
Mr. Jordan, your hand is up.
I was just gonna amen that and say that I personally don't find that unsettling in any way. That was the intent. It was about the culture. The fact that it has become musical was never the intent. That just is a habit that evolved. But the intent was just as you were describing, to begin to change that culture. And that's what the student musical performance was about. That's what the student board rep was about. But you're always in the process of becoming. So we have an opportunity now to continue to become what you described in terms of this student-focused work of the board, if indeed that's what our intent is to accomplish. But I just want to say it was about culture and change, and not just about, it was a benefit of having the student recognized, but the intent was about changing the culture of our meetings around student performance and highlighting students of Norfolk Public Schools.
Yeah, and I would say too that doing these agenda evaluations, you're not going to do them for every meeting, and but doing them every so often just to assure that the intent is still matched by what is actually happening. It's a valuable that does help to keep those things from shifting away from the original intent that you meant to have. So thank you for that. Okay, so let's go on to the next item is 4.05 Superintendent's Report. Is this student outcomes focused or not?
This is where the superintendent will give us some, she has a report that's usually accompanied by a video that actually talks about what's going on in the schools.
Mm-hmm.
So it's very student focused, but is it outcomes related? I would say no, not always.
Okay. Anyone else? So Lauren?
Well, it's not always student outcome. It just kind of puts a spotlight on different activities that are happening so that those that are viewing it can see it. And pretty much, to be honest with you, in our schools, if your school's got a performer or somebody on there, they're going to be playing it back on their morning news the next morning in that particular school. But I think that I like it. And I think if we're at, and I think that the superintendent can certainly make sure that the things that she spotlights now, like we're going to work on the performance piece to make sure that we include maybe the women in engineering project that won first place in the state or something, and that those kids could come in and do a demonstration. Well, I think here the same thing can happen. I still think it's good to spotlight what's happening in the schools. We can just make sure it's more on task toward what AJ was saying, the same way that we'll probably be doing that with the student performance, or whatever you call it, the student spotlight would be the same thing, would be what I would recommend rather than cutting it. I do think sometimes it's a little long. It probably wouldn't hurt to close the time a little bit. But aside from that, I like to see things that are showing whoever chooses to watch the board meeting I think I look at them as outcomes of the instruction or the programs or things that children are in. So that's just my point of view on this. I would not like to see it go. I'd like to see it shortened a little bit.
So modified, you're saying?
Modify the time, put a limit on the time. We need to be putting limits on the times that we do everything during our meeting, I think. So that's enough. That shouldn't be anything unusual. Because our meetings go, as we know, as I'm sure you've noticed, are very long. I'd like to see us have some time all right, the time's over for this discussion. Let's move on. I think it's the same thing with this and with student performance.
Tanya.
I was going to say something similar to Ms. Campson. I agree in shortening that, but if we are showcasing what our students are achieving, that may be, I think maybe we look at those two pieces and see how we can, really showcase what our students are doing where they are versus having to come to the school board building here, and maybe trying to meld those two components so that it's a concise package focused on students. So I would support that as well.
Well, I can kind of see what you're saying there, but I have to tell you that when students come in to do something inside the boardroom, it is a huge honor for those students. So just if we could kind of keep that in mind too, I would
Okay.
hate to see that go away because the kids are very excited. As I said, I've had some from my own school and it was a thrill for them to be able to come and do that.
Sometimes it's really late for the little ones.
Yeah,
So.
I was thinking about that, and it can be a hardship on families too. So anyway, there's a lot of different aspects to it, but I'll move on.
Yeah, and those are all aspects that are things good conversation and good things to consider. I think as when you get into the process of actually redesigning your agenda to fit the priorities and make those choices about how you use your time and really consider who's benefiting and who can access and all of those things that you've mentioned. Noelle.
I think that we can use the superintendent's report to have consistent language as we develop the priorities, the guardrails within our division. And so we can, even as they develop as we develop the agenda, as they develop the superintendent's report, they can outline it to the point where they can have a little tagline or something in it that says, tying into our community goal of blah, 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 blah. And so that way when we have our meetings, when we have our superintendent's report, when we go out to public, we are all using the same consistent language. And then maybe the community will start using that language as well.
Okay. Did I see any other hands? Hands up? Okay. So
my hand was up. I just wanted to kind of
ahead.
get to the other business piece because there were a couple of things that were mentioned and that I just want to reemphasize when we get to those sections.
Okay, great. Yeah. So just to keep in mind, as a result of this item, when we're going through these, when I'm asking if they're student outcomes focused or not, it's a matter of, did you receive information that tells you if the reality for your children is getting closer to the outcomes that you wanted for them and that you prioritized for them. So let's get to the next item is 4.06 School Board Clerk's Report, Recognitions and Observances. Is this student outcomes focused or not?
No.
And
I heard this is not student outcomes focused. So would you keep it, delete it, or modify it?
It can be pretty long.
Yeah, I would modify it. We could just send it out. We could send it out over email or something like that. It takes a long time to get through a lot of times. And
yeah, I think the thing that takes up the most time is the actual reading of the specific resolutions. I think that if those were posted and we just identified in heading that these are the things that we're observing and then just place it in the consent agenda, we could speed it up. Unless, we're honoring, because I know sometimes when we were in person, we would recognize new administrators and so forth who will come through. That's a more ceremonial thing of, as you talk about creating that culture and climate of welcoming. But I think that there are ways that we can definitely cut down on time.
Okay. Yeah, so a way to modify that, potentially have it posted and not actually read through those items and move it onto a consent, except for maybe, as special situations might present themselves that you might choose differently. Does that reflect what I heard? Okay, thank you. And then next is the consent agenda with personnel, bills, and payrolls, and approval of minutes. Is this student outcomes focused or not?
It's not. It's operational, and because of the simple fact that it's a consent agenda, it should be a quick item.
So keep, delete, or modify?
We have to vote on these things, so.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's important, and it goes quick. It goes really quick because we have to vote. This is a fast way to get a vote. It's like, unlike the, the discussion ones where the time is this one, we just comes up and we vote on it.
Yeah. Okay. Yep. And I will just put out there that I am a big fan of the consent agenda exactly for that purpose of the business items that need to be approved of in a quick fashion that would not need to be discussed. Okay, so then we move on to 6.01, monthly financial report. Is this student outcomes focused or not?
It's not. It's a function of the board and receiving its fiduciary responsibility in reviewing the financial report.
Yeah, and to me, that's work session. That should have been on the consent agenda. Everything on here really should be on the consent agenda, pretty much.
The monthly financial report, it's on the decision and discussion agenda because people often have questions about it.
Right, I understand that, but wouldn't they be better asked during the work session so that this would move along much faster? I mean, the way the ones that were already, the three that are up above it, were all discussed during a work session. And then here we don't have to do that. So, I mean, that's just what my opinion, that a lot of this could go right up there because they all have to have a vote. And unless it needs unless there's some special reason, and look how many of them are on here. Vote.
Yeah, these are all voted on individually, but the decision and discussion agenda is to give an opportunity for any last minute discussion.
So I mean,
some of it could have been presented at the work session. I don't have that agenda exactly, but things could have been.
Right, but sometimes we come back and we spend an hour discussing one of these.
Well, and that's a lack of preparation, I'd have to say. So when that happens, it's generally a lack of preparation or, something that is so that we just can't come together on. But usually aside from the financial report, everything else would have been discussed at the work session.
Right, and then we did discuss, for example, the return to learning, which means they recommended a vote there. But so why wasn't it in the consent agenda? I'm not arguing with anyone here. I'm just asking questions. It just seems like this is where we use so much time because we could have already discussed it in a work session and then we come back and we spend another hour discussing it before we vote. If we set a limit on it or something like 10 minutes to discuss it or 50, rather than letting it just drag on and on and on.
Okay, well, Tanya?
Yeah, so for the getting back to the monthly financial report, that is an item that is not typically included in our work session discussion. So, which is why it is in that portion of the agenda for the business meeting. And unless we, and I'm not sure this would be for Dr. Birdsong to answer, but if that is a possibility to move it to a work session, which is just keep in mind though, that is moving that piece, we're adding something to the work session. So, my feeling is that is our responsibility and I would keep it where it is. But I hear the comments of my colleagues around some of the other agenda topics that we'll get to, that we may have discussed in a work session and have, built some consensus around.
I'm going to call the orders of the day. It's 5 o'clock. I know that we started late, Madam Chair. So if we need to amend our agenda to add additional time so that we can officially do that. But that's one of the things I want to talk about, Cindy, later. Sticking to our agendas.
I'm not a fan of doing a formal agenda, taking a lot of time to go through the process of formally amending our agenda.
You can do it as a general consent. It doesn't need to have to be a formal vote, but we do need to recognize that our agenda states that we're supposed to move to another item at 5 o'clock.
Right.
So
I would have recognized that had, I mean, obviously, I didn't want to interrupt what Ms. Basine was saying. So we do have people coming in at 5 o'clock. And I think that we've,
Yeah.
Where to
So what I'll
place-
say is I think you've gotten the general idea of what
Yeah.
an agenda use evaluation is, and what the process is. And I would invite you to continue thinking about different ways to potentially add efficiencies or be reflective through that process. And we can discuss when we meet about our further activities along this agenda revision line, and go from there. So thank you all for your time and all of your input in the conversation today. And again, my apologies for my tardiness.
That's fine. It was a miscommunication, I believe. So, and just so everyone knows, we are meeting AJ and Cindy and Mr. Jordan and Dr. Birdsong and I are meeting to establish the times for next month's meetings. And we're going to be doing that hopefully this week. I think we're coming together tomorrow, actually. So, okay. Well, thank you for walking us through this. It was very insightful. And with that, I will go ahead and adjourn the governance training, and we will enter into our executive session.
Bye, everybody.
Thank you.
So we need to go over to the conference room.
Hold up, Madam Chair. So with that, I know you adjourned, but we need to do the, you want to go ahead and do the motion now?
Oh, yeah, I'm sorry. Yeah, go ahead. Yeah. So we're going to go you want to do the conference room or the motion here?
Are we still live?
Okay.
We'll check. We should be.
Okay, can I get a motion to go into closed session?
I was going to check.
Madam Chair, she's going to check, make sure we're still
that
live.
we're still live.
I can't really hear it. What's going on?
Oh, because she said adjourn. We just want to make sure that they didn't cut the feed.
So maybe at a future meeting, we can also talk about
Hey, you didn't cut us off, right?
when we have meetings of the board in public and meetings of the board for the public.
Okay.
We still live? All right, Madam Chair, I move that we enter into closed executive session.
Can I get a second? Dr. Gabriel seconded. Please read the motion, Ms. Tanner.
It's moved that members of the school board go into a closed session for the purposes which are set out in subsection A of section 2.2-3711 of the Virginia Freedom of Information Act as amended for discussion or consideration of prospective candidates for employment, assignment, appointment, promotion, performance, demotion, salaries, disciplining, or resignation of specific officers, appointees, or employees of the Norfolk Public Schools pursuant to subsection 1 of the Act. The subject of this portion of the session is the discussion of today's regular personnel agenda, discussion or consideration of disciplinary and any other matters concerning students in Norfolk Public Schools that would involve the disclosure of information contained in the scholastic record pursuant to subsection 2 of the Act. The subject of this portion of the session is the discussion of today's regular student support services agenda, and the consultation with legal counsel and briefing by staff members concerning actual or probable litigation or specific legal matters requiring the provision of legal advice by counsel pursuant to subsections 7 and 8 of the Act. The subjects of this section of the motion are currently pending litigation, recent and pending Freedom of Information Act requests, and the matters set out above in subsections A and B of this motion. Basine.
Aye.
Campson.
Aye.
Clanton.
Aye.
Gabriel. Jordan.
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. All right. Go over to the conference room for closed session.
Resolution certifying executive meeting of the School Board of the City of Norfolk in accordance with the provisions of the Virginia Freedom of Information Act. Whereas the School Board of the City of Norfolk has convened a closed meeting on this date pursuant to an affirmative recorded vote and in accordance with the provisions of the Virginia Freedom of Information Act. And whereas Section 2.2-3712 of the Virginia Code requires a certification by the School Board of the City of Norfolk that such closed meeting was conducted in conformity with Virginia law. Now therefore it be resolved that the School Board of the City of Norfolk hereby certifies that, to the best of each member's knowledge, only public business matters lawfully exempted from open meeting requirements by Virginia law were discussed in the executive meeting to which this certification resolution applies, and only such public business matters as were identified in the motion convening the executive meeting were heard, discussed, or considered by the School Board of the City of Norfolk. Basine? Campson? Clanton? Gabriel? Jordan? Smith? And Martin.